Okay, now, am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I was saying that I think the fire that I lit in that discussion on that day in 2016, I never expected that it will be culminate into introduction of a new core paper, a compulsory paper as a part of MA Economics, and I must congratulate Dr. Lingamurthy, Dr. Pushpa Saudati, and the Board of Studies members who have considered this to be a very good effort. With these words, I think let me go to I will share my presentation and I'll start. As you can see, the topic of my today's presentation is Tenets of Taxation and Welfareism in Kautilya's Arthashastra. A careful study of history of economic doctrines, as I have just in the introduction told, for example, a very popular textbook by the French authors Charles Guide and Charles Rist, which appeared first time in 1913 and then reappeared online as a free book in 2018. Guide and Rist, or any widely referred textbook of history of economic thought such as Eric Rowe, 1938. Actually, many people would remember Eric Roll was a compulsory textbook in Delhi University for history of economic thought. One would notice that pre-classical or ancient social, economic, and political philosophy would start with the Old Testament or Aristotle and Plato or Socrates. In some of the recent books dealing with the same subject claim to include social and economic thought from Islamic writings. They mention, for example, Ibn Khaldun, Zaid bin Ali, and Imam Zafar, and the like. That's not a bad thing, that's a very good thing. But in some other textbooks, you will find Chinese scholars like Guangzhou, Confucius, Ming Tao, and Lao Tzu's philosophy also that's mentioned. For example, it's mentioned in Ajit Dasgupta's book, Indian Economic Thought in 1980. It's very surprising and disturbing too that a great scholar, philosopher, and a royal advisor to the Emperor Chandragupta Maurya of 321 BC, the most celebrated political economic scholar, at least in the Indian subcontinent, Kautilya or Vishnugupta or Chanakya, does not find a place in these works of Eurocentric, Western-oriented authors. Mass popularization of Kautilya took place with the Doordarshan telecast of television serial Chanakya, 47 episodes, produced and directed by Chandra Prakash Dwivedi from 1991 through 1992. It attracted a big television audience, no doubt, but the projection of Chanakya as a mastermind to win the enemy at any cost by means fair and foul, which earned Kautilya an epithet, Chanakya Niti, all of us are aware, that did not augur well with his innate creative intellectual prowess that is exhibited in his Arthashastra. Of course, limitations of a television serial are very well known to all of us. Term Chanakya Niti acquired a kind of a notoriety to become synonymous with nefarious tantrum strategy to decimate the opponent and conquer the adversity. Some use the term Kutilya Niti also to go in tandem with Kautilya. And of course, one of the important scholars, Trotman, says Kautilya's family name was Kutila. Well, that's only incidental. That has nothing to do with what I'm going to say. Now, Kautilya's Arthashastra, believed to have appeared in 4th century BC and was a contemporary of Aristotle, but did not get the same prominence as Charles Valliere et al. Have pointed out. The Penguin edition of Kautilya's Arthashastra appeared in 1992 under the editorship of Ellen Rangarajan, first appeared as a different edition in 1987. Incidentally, this was the first book I got hold of in my hands on Arthashastra when I was a student in JNU. And I had the opportunity to go through this book way back in 1990s itself as a student of doctoral studies in JNU. Rangarajan has dedicated the work to R. Shama Shastri and R.P. Kangle for, in his own words, dedicated with gratitude to R. Shama Shastri, who discovered the text and translated it first, and R.P. Kangle, whose critically edited text, translation, and study are the basis for the later translations. I made a modest effort here to extricate Arthashastra from the morass of misunderstood perceptions of a great political economic manual ahead of Adam Smith by 2000 years. Significance of Arthashastra escaped the attention of the study of social and economic thought until the beginnings of the 20th century. However, some scholars have made authoritative efforts in the form of commentaries, undertook careful examination, and have already brought to the fore some important dimensions of Arthashastra that are available in the literature at the present. Now, writing Introduction to Arthashastra, The Science of Wealth by Thomas R. Trotman, Gurucharan Das, in that book, has commented, since Arthashastra is the world's first manual in political economy, it can be seen that some Indian economists and historians of economic thought have brought to the notice of the Western world the writings of Kautilya that has gained momentum and alerted the academia and social sciences disciplines to take cognizance of economic ideas from Arthashastra. Let me move. Ajit Dasgupta in chapter 3 of his work remarks that though Kautilya's work by name implies science of wealth, it has not directly addressed the questions of inquiry into the wealth of nations as Smith did. Rather, it has more semblance with Camaryllis of Germany, offering advice to the ruler on how to increase and preserve his wealth and power. Camaryllists were considered predecessor to mercantilists, who were mostly bullinists. Kautilya is much more than the German school. And here I beg to differ with Ajit Dasgupta, and the next slide I will propose in the following slides. On a close examination of Kautilya's Arthashastra has more semblance with the physiocrats rather than Camaryllists. He would be similar to Camaryllists only to the extent of unification of the nation, strengthening the ruler, public king, since king has the sole responsibility of taking care of the subjects in all dimensions, starting with safeguarding the livelihoods, to protecting them from external aggression, to saving the lives from natural calamities or disasters. I feel that Kautilya's ideas are more akin to physiocrats than Camaryllists for the following reasons. Kautilya wrote Arthashastra while he was a royal advisor to Chandragupta, who treated Kautilya as his guru. Yesterday, Professor Balbir Sehab told he is like a Rajarshi and a Rajguru. Yes, folklore says Chandragupta was picked up by Vishnugupta from a playground and groomed him to be a king to take revenge on mean and distraught Nanda dynasty who had insulted Kautilya out of arrogance. Similarity may also be seen here between Francois Quesnay and Kautilya, both being royal advisors to their respective rulers in different periods, of course. Francois Quesnay was advisor to King Louis Bonaparte IV and was personal physician to Madame Pompadour, mistress of the King Louis. He was not only founder of the physiocratic school, but exercised tremendous influence in the royal court and the emperor himself. He wrote his Tableau Economique while being the royal advisor. It's well known now that physiocracy strongly advocated land as the only productive source or factor of wealth, and land with the application of labor can only produce wealth. Kautilya, just short of producing a Tableau Economique, as did Kane, he graded land on the basis of the soil quality, agronomic conditions, designed graphics of a variety of lands. On the whole, Kautilya has accorded prime importance to land and the tiller, that's a farmer. He claimed that farmer or agriculturists should be rendered honorable wages. King is solely responsible for this activity. Likewise, it is the duty of the farmer to select the right seed in the right crop season to reap the maximum crop yield. Any negligence of farmer attracts not only penalty but also imprisonment. Now, strengthening and unification of the state in favor of a king or a ruler may appear common between Kautilya and the Camaralis, but the definition of wealth in Arthashastra has a much broader connotation and much wider implications. In this quotation from Rangarajan, in the happiness of his subjects lies the king's happiness in their welfare. His welfare he shall not consider as good only that which pleases him, but treat as beneficial to him whatever pleases his subjects. This is the translation of a shloka from original Kautilya's Arthashastra. The above citation from Kautilya indicates that king is never above his subjects, and welfare of his subjects is crucial in governance. These things are very important in the modern context also, because in most of the capitalist democracies across the world, while talking about the welfare of the people, seldom the real attempt to take care of the welfare is given. And the most tragic definition in the history of economic doctrines comes from neoclassical theory. I will speak about that later, maybe in the last. In my opinion, neoclassical theory that emerged with the name marginal revolution, I think is an aberration in the continuum of economic doctrines from ancient times till the modern times. Except neoclassical theory, I think the most of the connectivity we can build, and that's what I am attempting right now, as you can see. Significance accorded to land is no less than the French physiocrats who considered land as the only productive factor capable of generating additional produce over and above the cost of production. Kautilya justified wealth and through morally justified proper means. Laborers employed on agricultural farmland deserve respectable wages. Of course, I didn't underline, but please remember respectable wages. Kautilya's wealth was a very wide concept. It included money, commodity, bullion, precious metals, property owned by the state and by individuals as well. What I mean, public property was there during Kautilya's time. Of course, the public property, not in the sense of the current democratic definition of public, but the state was being identified in conformity with the king. So the property owned by the king is the public's property. That's why it's also the state property. Now let's proceed further. Acquisition of wealth justly is surest way to protect the people and the ruler, and also against unexpected natural disasters, which I mentioned before also. Wealth not only is the source of power and strength to rule, but also to dispense welfare promotion through the distributional benefits via appropriate pre-decided shares to the king, subjects eking livelihoods from different vocations. We must understand that neoclassical theory has segmented the price theory and the distribution theory into separate compartments. But from ancient times till the present, minus neoclassical theory, majority people, they never tried to separate price theory and distribution theory. They were, so in that sense, Keynesian Keynesian initiation of macroeconomics was not necessary in these doctrines, and that's what we have to appreciate and understand. In Kautilya's perception, state is given supremacy since king, ruler, is a sole protector of geographical boundaries, safeguarding lifestyles, well, modern language, living standards of the subjects, and ensure smooth transportation of people from one place to the other, laying firm roads as well as creating infrastructure. Professor Sihag mentioned this also yesterday. Arthashastra appears to attach considerable importance to the settlement of land. He, the king, should cause settlement of the country which had been settled before or which had not been settled before by bringing in people from foreign lands or by shifting the overflow population from his own country. Of course, this is mentioned in Trot. In fact, the definition of artha in Kautilya emerged from livelihoods. Livelihoods are nothing but the vritti or vocation. And there is a quotation that you can see later also. Wealth finds highest expression in the kingship because it involves acquisition of material resources, including forest resources, safeguarding inhabitants in times of pleasure, happiness, as well as in times of calamities and disasters. I will just, in this slide, I will just emphasize one point. It's not correct to think that the Hindu philosophers or Hindu ancient sages and economists like Kautilya were very clearly aware of the material, the value of the material resources and their contribution to uh, gross development product, GDP, the gross national product also, and GNP. So, uh, this I will bring in again at a later slide. So this point to be noted like this. Now, Kautilya is of the view that, one sec. Cultivable land is better than mines because mines fill only the treasury while agricultural production fills both treasury and storehouses. When we talk about mines, treasury, and of course the productive wealth, we can see that Kautilya had a definition of all the three. Now, of course, remotely we can say that primitive accumulation, the concept in Marx, is some kind of akin to this kind of a thing, but Marx's approach was altogether different, and he was original kind of a classic in his own. That we will come to later again in the last slides. Superintendent of agriculture, also overseer of agriculture, and state or king should understand the details of agriculture. He has talked about minute details of cultivation, farm products, farming, and trading transactions. Kautilya had an exhaustive methodology of cultivation, selection of seeds, and more importantly, meteorology and rainfall. He has pointed out that irrigation should be planned and there should be a provision for which is a state responsibility. Kautilya has given additional concern on professionalizing agriculture. He emphasized the role of lands owned by the king, that is state farm, over private land owned by the individuals. He focused on specialized knowledge in farming practices, agronomy, and distinguished between dry land agriculture and land with abundant supply of water. It's very interesting to note that Kautilya's canons of taxation are remarkably similar to Adam Smith's canons of taxation to be formulated in his Wealth of Nations 2000 years later, on which, of course, Professor Sigag made very extended observations and comments. Smith's first canon is the canon of equality, which states that the burden of tax liability should be proportional to the ability to pay, and incidence and burden should not be at the same point, rather be distributed across the different income holders or earners. According to Spengler, Kautilya's discussion of taxation and expenditure, apparently in keeping with the traditional doctrine, gave expression to three Indian principles. Taxing power is limited. Taxation should not be felt to be heavy or exclusive. Tax increases should be graduated. There is a citation that you can find here. Now, let me just comment that in the modern capitalist democracies, these fundamental principles are forgotten, and it's abundantly evident in the above citation that Kautilya had clearly postulated that a king must be prosperous enough through tax revenue collection. At the same time, the stress on taxpayers should not be heavy and burdensome. Rather, the tax burden shall be distributed across the sections so as to minimize the pain. In other words, within quotations, fair and just. Well, students of economic doctrines are aware of these terms. Norms of the period of the scholastics and Middle Ages is also preceded in Kautilian enunciations, putting explicitly the ideas of the church or the Saint Thomas Aquinas were reflected much before in Arthashastra. Now, the second canon of Smith is canon of certainty. We state that the tax which each individual has to pay ought to be certain and not arbitrary. The time of payment, the amount to be paid ought all to be clear and plain to the contributor and to every other person. See this remarkable similarity in Kautilya in the following quotation. Collection of revenue at a season when people were unable to pay is forbidden because it injures the source and causes immense trouble. This is mentioned in Gopal in the same quotation that I gave before. In Kautilya's views, the tax system should be fair and tax rates should reflect people's ability to pay in terms of wealth or income or sales revenue. And again, this is quoted in Vinay Chandra Sen in his celebrated work. The policy is to make the richest section of the peasantry or those who hold lands in fertile areas of high productive caliber, okay, to contribute more or have higher tax rates to apply and to grant exemption from this liability where the cause of production and development may suffer through high taxation. Kautilyan approach clearly conforms in favor of progressive taxation of modern day public finance principles of a democratic system. Higher rates of sales taxation apply to the most expensive commodities traded. For example, gold, silver, diamonds, pearls, etc. And progressively lower rates of sales taxation apply to less expensive commodities, for example, clothes, threads, grains, and dairy products, and finally plywood or agriculture or bamboo. A similar system of graduated tax rates apply to the occupation of women and income taxes levied on artisans and craftsmen, where the highest rates are levied on the most skilled persons. Now there's the same quotation. And fourth and last canon of Smith is canon of economy. It stipulates that every tax ought to be so contrived as both to take out and keep out of the pockets of the people as little as possible over and above what it brings into the public treasury of the state. The implication of this canon is that cost of tax collection procedures and instruments must be kept at the lowest minimum possible. I think Kautilya has practiced, not just stipulated, but practiced as, the single soul, as Professor Sihag yesterday commented, the Planning Commission. The one-man planning commission. Kautilya advocated for a centralized revenue and tax collection system with multi-tiered hierarchy with minimalist administrative cost structure. The quotation is provided. Who is the founder of labor theory of value? Now, this is a tricky question I would like to take up, and I think which needs more attention to the current, at least, youngsters who need to be properly, uh, properly kind of, given a total view so that they can judge for themselves. Undergraduate students of economics in the universities world over would reply in a jiffy, Adam Smith. Yeah, you ask a question in any university or college who are studying economics, who is the founder of labor theory of value? Adam Smith. After a careful study of history of economic doctrines, an intriguing question arises. Is it true? In fact, since the times of Kautilya, Aristotle, Plato, and others, the questions pertaining to value, price, labor, labor time, and other categories have appeared in one form or other. Let me explore further. In a recent and widely, that is Professor Balbir Sehag, we had him directly hear from him. So therefore, just I will read the last one. Sehag's above observation that Smith is a plagiarist must be further examined by the youngsters. Did Kautilya propose any labor theory of value like his contemporary Western philosophers such as Socrates or Aristotle in its elementary form? Yes, he did. Aristotle did write many places and tried to distinguish the intrinsic value of a good and value in exchange. Okay. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, there is no evidence of writings by Socrates at all. Please remember this. Some of the people who are good in political economy might recollect this. He is projected as a great philosopher, logician, greatly admired in his circles and hailed by people like Plato and Xenophon. In Kautilyan case, his ideas are reflected in the written compendium, Arthashastra. Arthashastra held that a just wage, it's in quotations because of the scholastic notion, wage to be paid to workers should be based on the amount of time spent on the job, the amount of output created, and the skills necessary to perform the required tasks. And this is a quotation from, again, Vinay Chandra Sen. It explicitly recognized three distinct components for determining the market value of labor: the level of skill requirement, that is the human capital element, labor hours worked, and units of output produced, the labor productivity element as stated in. Okay, that's over. Let's move to the next one. A uniform and flat rate of wages for laborers of all sorts is impracticable. In an those who are working on labor theory of value, you must have studied a lot to distinguish the value theory proposed by Smith and Ricardo. But you never could have imagined that, a similar thing existed in Kautilya also. Okay. None of us have missed that the Ricardian element starts with something called the skill variation. And Smith did not, account for the skills in his labor theory of value. Anyway, now let me complete this. The wages of a laborer cannot but be dependent on the market value of the article produced. The latter again depends on the cost of the production, including the cost of material used. Thus, the settlement of just wages is a complicated matter depending not just on the skill of the worker employed, but also on the total outcome of his work. That is both the quality and quantity of the job completed by him, which is mentioned in Shama Shastri. And then Nagarajan also mentions the same kind of a thing. Production should not be hampered by the irresponsible conduct of workers is also there. But then, very importantly, Kautilya was not against the labor unions. He says that labor unions is okay as long as they don't hamper the production process. Do you think anything similar to Japan, which Ajit Dasgupta also mentions? In the Japanese system, they go on strikes also, but without affecting the net output that is due in that year. So if some bells ring here, well, you should appreciate yourself. Guilds of artisans. Kautilya mentions them as Sanghabrata, often functioned as contractors and employed semi-skilled and unskilled laborers to protect these laborers. And Kautilya, as cited by Narayan Chandra Bandyopadhyay in his book Kautilya, recommends that a board of overseers review the guild contracts concerning wage rates and working conditions. Now, the guilds of artisans surprisingly appears in many of the uh, classical economics, including Marx, the craft guilds, artisans, and then we are all used to appreciating the terms like, the genuine apprentice, which appeared, during the transformation from the feudal to capitalist system around the time of industrial revolution. That we will talk little later. Price formation in Kautilya takes a form of bidding. Let me repeat, price formation in Kautilya takes a form of bidding. A buyer of a good bargains for a lower price and seller would toggle for a higher price. Finally, a mutually agreeable point determines clearing price. Kautilya is clear that this type of bidding may result in some chaos. Okay? Hence, the state or king should administer a price. I have not highlighted every word because each one looks to be very important. At least in some select essential commodities demanded by all the sections of the society. Okay. So also the wages, which are determined by labor time and should be capable of maintaining the livelihoods of workers and their families. Let me move to the next one. Distinction of Smith's price formation from the pre-classicals and other classical economists also indicates to natural price as distinct category that separates Adam Smith from others. Such a category is not explicit in Kautilya for many reasons. I'm giving the reasons. Indian philosophers like Kautilya focus more on dharma, a moral behavior, an ethical conduct that Sihag mentioned yesterday. Ethics prevailed a lot because of their ancient traditional beliefs and their religious practices. Morality and ethics played a supreme role. That's the reason why they gave more importance to dharma and then moksha, salvation. Simultaneously, Kautilya stated a very important fact that artha, that is the wealth, is the foundation of a society without which no king or his subjects can survive. If some of you have already understood the pointer that I'm trying to make, material resources are the base of any society. So whatever the peripheral formations that take place, they take place only on the foundation of the material society. So creation of wealth, or in the modern context, economic growth, is very, very important in Kautilyan time as well. Let me proceed. Kautilya's time is the time of feudal oligarchies or monarchies, with the sole purpose of serving the king or a privileged few. Kautilyan welfarist dimensions were constricted by the features and structure of the ruling system of the period. Smith's inquiry coincided with an epoch characterized by industrial revolution, which transformed the production process with rapid technological changes that consolidated the capitalist advances and transform the Western world, leaving behind the pre-capitalist, semi-capitalist Asian, African, and Latin American countries. Okay, well, let me proceed further, then I will try to interact more after I complete the presentation. Philosophers rationalizing capitalistic developments pivot on vantage points, justified backwardness in various perspectives. Very popular Max Weber's Oriental despotism is one such postulation. As, of course, many of you are aware, Oriental despotism points out that in ancient regimen and in feudal societies, countries like India or many countries in Asia, like say uh, Japan, China, or Korea, they were all hampered by the Oriental despotism, and therefore economic growth never formed the main agenda of uh, thinkers like Kautilya Arthashastra. I dispute here, that's what I'm trying to present, that Kautilya had a fantastic understanding of economic growth, which I already mentioned before. Attention paid to Asian societies remained inadequate by the Western scholars. Marx's depiction of Asiatic mode of production also and hydraulic societies demanded a larger explanation than it considered and needs to be probed in detail by the young scholars. And I think now maybe Central University of Karnataka, Gulbarga, since they have established a typical uh, core paper, your hard work will progress, I think, into culmination of maybe a Center for Advanced Study of Studies on Kautilya. Let's hope that. Marx's project was totally different than his contemporary English classical school. Everyone knows that. Or, in his own words, vulgar political economy, as Marx called them, was aimed at understanding the laws of motion of capitalism to explain the origin of surplus value, the backbone of capitalism itself. Marx, I'm quoting from Grundrisse. Okay, 1993 is not a capital. Don't look for that. That's way back. So it's from Grundrisse. Had pointed out a radical substitution of productive forces through a technical progress which results in displacement of the workers from their jobs, creating a reserve army of the unemployed workforce that shall culminate into overthrow of capitalist system itself. Many questions spring up. Has it happened anyway? Well, this kind of a thing, as all you know, and none can really miss out that the credit must go to Marx only for having shown that technology and technical progress are such crucial parameter in capitalist process of production that nobody can deny. Even Aerosol, whoever have talked about the endogenous technological progress, cannot, ignore Marxian proposition. Richard Merrill, for example, has directly acknowledged that Marx's greatest contribution was technical progress. And that's why, with the precise idea that some of you will refer, Grundrisse, I gave 1993 quotation from Grundrisse. Anyway, and actually Marx also went further to state that it is the inevitability of the capitalist process of production that compels compels a capitalist to innovate and invent on technology, and that's how the current globalization, depending on the only one parameter, namely technology and technical progress, that's happening. Anyway, answer depends. Has it happened anywhere? Answer depends on the optimism of the protagonist and, of course, the ecstasy of the antagonist. Let me proceed to conclude. Kautilyan Arthashastra has thrown many dimensions of social and economic philosophy encompassing various facets of human life that were relevant not only to ancient period, but also to the current age of globalization. Kautilya, Smith, or Marx, all of them had beholden human welfare as the basic objective of the ongoing system. Tragedy is the current modern economic theory or economic practice does not recognize the strength of welfarism within economic progress, because human progress is nothing with just simply economic growth. Economic growth, the basic question we all must know that not just the generation of the surplus product, but how the surplus product is being distributed across the sections around the globe. Otherwise, that will culminate into some kind of unevenness. Unevenness not only at the global level, but also at the regional, local, and minuscule level. And that kind of a thing will assert into some kind of a dissent from the local people, regional, and subnational, which gives kind of a conflict. And conflict resolution becomes a terrible problem, as we can see in the current capitalist democracy. They are unable to attend to many questions, and they are really banging their head around to search for the solutions. Whether they will succeed, we have to see that. Now, let me put a very interesting question before I close my presentation. I think I have just 5 more minutes. I think I'm on dot. I was asked to complete before 12:30. Maybe I'll take maybe 5 minutes or more, because in the beginning introduction took some 5 minutes. 12:35 or 12:40, I'm going to close the presentation. This point I would like to mention because students of economics encounter an interesting question in classroom. Water, which is needed by every human being, is cheap and may be available free of cost, whereas diamond is needed by minuscule section of population, is exorbitantly priced and is very expensive. Why? This curious puzzle is given the name water diamond paradox. Appears in Smith's The Wealth of Nations. If some of you know the answer, please tell me. You are free. You can unmute your microphone. Some specific, principle of neoclassical theory is applied. Well, without waiting for your answer, because the time is restricted, we are talking about diminishing marginal utility. Okay, and that is supposed to be the greatest discovery of Smith. Well, how many are aware that the same question was raised by Aristotle in his Grammatistics? There he dealt, of course, some of my students, if by chance they are participating in this today's workshop, they will recollect in my classroom lectures. I always pointed out to this. Aristotle also raised the same question, where he dealt also the problem of value, price, and labor. A systematic study of evolution of philosophy, of economic ideas and doctrines, combined with original scriptures from ancient period to the present, would reveal the following. Please make a note of these three important. Obviously, I just try to put my thought on this. Evolution of any discipline is cumulative, incremental, and as Joseph Schumpeter says, it's a dynamic and continuous process. A very celebrated, economic theoretician, and of course, a kind of a neo-Ricardian, Mark Bloch, in his economic theory in retrospect, whatever he proposed, I think, is a disjunctured analysis and at times fractured of a static variety. Objective assessment of evolution of doctrines is often constrained by time, space, and more than anything, ideological leanings. Thank you very much for having given me this opportunity. Now I am open to any kind of questions or comments.
Sir, I'm Dr.
Thank
B.
you,
Gopal
sir.
Singh.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your enlightening lecture on Kautilya's views on various economic issues, including tax, labor, land, agriculture, market equilibrium, of course, theories of distributions. How these ideas were similar to classicalist and neo-classicalist, but unfortunately, as you said, he didn't get his overdue. Hopefully, he will get in future. So I request the participants, if you have any questions to sir, you can ask.
Sir, with regard to the reference you are making,
Your question should be direct to the sir.
you are making a reference to
Sir, Professor.
physiocrat Koenig.
Okay,
Physiocrat
okay.
Koenig with that of the Kautilya, and also you are making a reference with Adam Smith.
Yes.
And we know that Koenig gave importance to land, and Kautilya also gave importance to land.
Gopal
No
Singh, sir.
doubt. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I am speaking. No doubt, even Adam Smith also gave importance to land, though Adam Smith was telling labor is the only factor of production. Without nature, without land, production is not possible. So, in my opinion, that we see that even Adam Smith has also taken into consideration the land factor as Kautilya has considered. In fact, the labor theory of value, which is given by Adam Smith, continued with Ricardo and also by Karl Marx. Your reference to all these theories with the classical and also the relationship between these physiocrats and classical and Kautilya is really appreciable. It's a very good paper. No question. It's only an observation. Thank you very much.
May I know who is calling? Who is asking this question?
Dr. B. Gopal Singh from Mysore.
Dr. Gopal Singh, thank you very much for your observations and comment. You are very right that I deliberately tried to, put forward an argument in contrast with Ajit Dasgupta, mainly, which became very popular all over the world. Most of the European economists also mentioned Ajit Dasgupta's statement that, uh, you know, uh, Kautilyan Arthashastra is close to uh, Camarillus of Germany. And for that matter, later somebody can draw an analogy from even List and others, Frederick List and others. But that's not my contention here. I would rather stick to the surplus product generated in the natural productive land, like land, and then applied by labor and of course also capital. When we are using, the instruments like plow cart or a plow or pickaxe, whatever the productive forces at the time available, we are trying to take into consideration the three things like capital, labor, applied to land. So in that sense, I was trying to make a comparison with physiocrats. And as you said rightly, Smith's labor theory of value would be totally different. And Smith's labor theory of value, of course, the debate between Ricardo and Smith apart, and Marx has entered, and the whole tenor and the content of the discussion has changed. So my submission here would be only to think that in the current period, many people now, even the policymakers, are some kind of trying to jostle the farmers, agricultural laborers, and the marginal farmers, the people, the people who earn livelihoods over there are being pushed into corner, whereas we should pay more attention. We should pay more attention to, otherwise we can't avoid the crisis among the farmers, agricultural laborers. I think before it transforms into a major struggle, we all should pay, not just in India, all over the world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir.
As you have concluded, it's all the culmination of the ideas which will give rise to the new science. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for wonderful lecture. Just I want to give my own understanding because since I'm teaching the Kautilya Arthashastra, generally we give the credit to Adam Smith regarding the division of labor. But Kautilya is the foremost person who has divided the land into different categories as well the labor. So he emphasized the labor with different comparisons with fort land, dry land, water land, like that. And he divided the land into different categories based on the water and the area of land, characteristics of the land. As well, he divided the labor into based on their efficiencies. Today we call it skill. So skill-based labor division has been divided through Kautilya treaties first time. So that we ignored all these years. Better it's the right time to lighten up the treatise. Whatever yesterday Professor Balbir Singh Sir rightly said, whatever modern economic theories are there, it is almost it's a continuation of Kautilya Arthashastra only. That's what I believe. If I am wrong, maybe Manohar also may be correct.
Thank you, Dr. Lingamurthy. I think your observations are very correct. When you talk about efficiency in land, from the original writing of Arthashastra, what I found is that more than the skill and the technical efficiency that we are talking in terms of the neoclassical understanding, Chanakya was of the view that efficiency in terms of the large scale farming, and he gave a very focused importance to the state farm, that is the farm owned by the king. So the small holdings debate that we have in the modern economics, I think was not, I would say that, he did not think in those lines. Rather, he was more concerned with, you know, uh, the large scale farming of the state. So therefore, the efficiency parameters that we are applying, like, the productive efficiency, technical efficiency, or market efficiency, those things may not be applicable in uh, Kautilya's case, like, that goes on with the neoclassical case. Okay. So, but your perception of, bringing this, whether it is efficiency of the technical variety or the skill variety, I think you must remember, Lingamurthy, one thing. More than anybody, you will be shocked to know that even the pioneer in neoclassical economics like Alfred Marshall, he did not give major emphasis on, technical skills or efficiency. You will remember Alfred Marshall proposed that skills are only a quasi constraint. Okay. A quasi constraint. In the long run, all skills would be standardized. So in the long run, there will not be any quasi constraint of variations in the skills. So the same kind of a analysis that Professor Marshall proposed has taken again way back in the last century by none other than uh, Arthur Lewis, the greatest non-white Nobel Prize winner in economics. Arthur Lewis has tried to bring in the same issue, that skill variation among the laborers is only a quasi constraint. It cannot be in the long run. All variants get vanished. So I just ask you to keep a tab on this, because you have some good ideas. Maybe you can focus more and refer to the references also that I have given. And of course, you are accessible to me through email and various other things, or anybody in the participants also can write to me email. I'll be glad to interact with you. Thank you.
Professor,
Yeah.
it is a very informative and well structured lecture, and I'm pretty sure that all the audience might benefited a lot. And I have one just comment, maybe, perhaps. When we see, starting from Chanakya to mercantilist physiocrats or classicalists, wherever, we see that economics, welfare is the main pillar of our subject, human welfare, maximization. But despite all that, we have not been able to establish just and equal society even today. And as Professor Siha was commenting yesterday, we need ethics. We have to create Rajashrees, through our education system. Then only we can achieve sustainable economic growth. So, but it is very unfortunate to observe that ethics is disappearing. Unfortunately, from the system of higher education, even from the educational system, which comprises of the so-called well-educated people. So then what would be the future of our country? Are we able to create Rajashrees? Are we able to achieve just and equal society? But we have not been able to even today.
Yes, I
Your
entirely.
comments or your take?
Yeah.
Your
Please,
take on that? Yeah, please.
yes. Yeah. If you have finished, let me
Yes.
just make a few observations. Yes, Professor Pushpa, you are absolutely right. I am entirely in agreement with you. And that's what I made some observations in my presentation at some time. I have a full paper on ethics in social sciences, particularly in economics. And I am the one who gave a lot of importance to ethics. As you said rightly, that what is missing in the modern context is mainly ethics. Now, I think we have to restore back the ethics, as you rightly you said, into the modern system, and particularly into the politico-economic system. Actually, I didn't have the time to comment on Professor Siddharth's observation yesterday about new education policy. In the context of new education policy, let me just point out to all our distinguished participants here, including you, Professor Rangarajan, Kasturi Rangan, I'm sorry, Professor Kasturi Rangan, the formulator of new education policy, the document goes on almost like, 480 pages. And the final education policy that was tabled in the parliament, it runs only to 60 to 65 pages. It's a tragedy that, they didn't pay attention to Professor Kasturi Rangan's recommendations. He gives a lot of importance to ethics to be practiced, because university education system particularly must be geared to that. And people only remember language orientation and all. No, he says that how you will combine libertarian education system by pulling up social sciences, humanities, and sciences as a combined, recipe that should be given to the students, which actually elevates them and enhances their values of perception. And they will be the real contributors to the modern society, and our development will be governed by that. So, education policy, the current, government has proposed a policy completely truncated. The original document, is nothing. They just simply, have taken some points which they thought are relevant. So that's why I think in education policy also we must take this aspect. Yes, madam, as you said, ethics are a very important role, and I am with you that we have to all work together to bring back ethics to the forefront.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. There are few questions in the chat box, sir. We'll forward you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, one question is on the centralized tax system.
Okay.
Yeah, shall I read, sir? One,
Yeah, please do. Please do. It's good. All of us will know, right?
sir, my question is related to centralized tax revenue. You said Kautilya favored centralized tax revenue, but in reality, agriculture land taxation comes under state list. Then how it can be related to centralized taxation? In democracy, it is related to decentralized progressive taxation. So it is question from Bhagyasri Iramat. Please, she is asking.
Yeah, I think
regarding
I will, Dr. Basavaraj, if you allow me, then I can answer Bhagyasri.
Please, sir, please.
See, the Kautilyan central tax rate system was relevant to the monarchy, okay, or oligarchy, or the kingdom, the state, because kingdom was always identified as a state. So say there, the tax system was very foolproof. And I have told you in the presentation, of course, I might not have read, but in one of the slides, I have told you that for collection of the tax rate system, there is a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy of, 5 tax where they can go and collect. So, Bhagyasri, you should know, Kautilya also proposed a kind of, decentralization in the form of a hierarchy in his own limitations. The current capitalist democracy, which has not got no comparison with what Kautilya was writing at his time, but still, we have faced a lot of aberrations because of our own, making. In the policy formulation, actually, we didn't know where to actually calculate and how to do. Very simple example is GST. Okay, the current prevalent system, GST is actually such an advanced system. Okay, generalized system of preferences is one of the most advanced systems. But in India, the whole world is pointing out that Indian GST system is one of the faulty ones. Why? Obviously, we should not attribute the practical operational issues with the theoretical issues. So that's where I advise Bhagyasri to go deep into the study, and then if she has any further, doubts or clarifications, she can write them. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Kiran Bodoni, you can ask your questions. What is your question? Kiran Bodoni, are you there? Yeah, please, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon. My question is related to, can we provide Kautilya approval?
Kiran, 1 sec. Kiran, hello, Kiran. Can you hear me, Kiran? See, your voice is breaking. Your voice is breaking. You please come again. Your voice is breaking.
Yeah, sir, see what our second question is, sir, my second question related to we mentioned the Kautilya work as theoretical framework of classical economist work, like that she's asking. Sir, question is not clear.
No. See, when Kautilya has written Arthashastra, he never had anything in his mind, okay? Because they're all his successors. They all appeared after his leaving the world a long time, a long gap. So there is no question that, he had anybody in mind. And as, Professor Sihag yesterday said, it's originally conceived and his own, mind and that kind of a thing. And if there is any similarity or interpretation, it's our own approach, that our own perspective, we are trying to, make it that way. Okay.
There are two people who raised
Hello.
their hand, Mayuri Reddy and CA
Am I audible?
Hanumanlu, sir.
Yeah. Yes, Mayuri Reddy. And who
Hello.
else?
Where is Appa? Sir, Manohar sir.
Sir, you are audible.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to answer, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, Manohar sir.
Hello. Am I audible, sir?
Sir, Basura, sir, you are
Yeah,
audible.
you are audible.
Sir,
Please.
sir, about Chanakya, he was concentrating very much on welfare and
Exactly.
wealth creation, wellness.
Yes.
Then
Absolutely.
in that process, he wanted to give more priority to productivity and fair distribution of wealth to all contributors of land, capital, resources, management. And he
Yeah.
was more concentrating on management, efficiency of management.
Yes.
That is most important. Here we are missing is management. In the process of equalization, we are missing management. Instead of equal opportunities, we are going for equalizing everything. That is creating another problem. And also, we need not follow any Western writers also, because our Kautilya is superior to all ancestral, forerunner to all people. We need not take any of their examples also. We did not follow them. We did not prescribe them also. This is my opinion, sir.
Yeah. I agree with you, and I refer you to consult. There are many books on management,
Yes.
where they have tried to apply Kautilyan principles to modern management.
Yes.
There are many books available. You may
Yes,
refer
sir.
to that. But then, as I tell you, nothing can be replicated from, say, a hindsight into the present. It's
Yes,
only
sir.
a projection of, what you want to project.
Yes,
If you
yes.
want to project, the modern management principles should take into,
Yes.
not just maximization of either the company, welfare
Yes.
of the company, or maximization of profit, but also should pay how the stakeholders get their, share
And
fairly distributed.
yes.
And I think you can certainly, as you said correctly,
Sir, one more thing,
and a
sir.
lot of books are there. I have my references.
Yes,
Yeah, please.
one more thing, sir. Advanced price mechanism for producers and manufacturers, and
Yes.
administered price mechanism for consumers, so that he should be assured, the consumer should be assured of quality,
Yes, I
quantity,
have
supply.
mentioned that also in the presentation,
Yes.
Dr. Hanumanth Rao.
Thank you, sir.
What's your name? I'm sorry.
Sir, Hanumanlu. I'm a
Hanuman.
chartered accountant.
Yeah. Dr. Hanumanlu has been presented also about administered prices. There is
Yes,
a
thank
lot.
you, sir. Thank you,
Actually,
sir. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now over to session here, our Dean, School of Business Studies, Professor Pushpayam Saudati, Madam. Madam, for your remarks.
I would like to thank Professor Manohar Rao for a very well informative lecture, and he compared very well how the Kautilya Arthashastra has been neglected by the West, which was written much before our Adam Smith and all. So, sir, it's a very informative and enlightening lecture. And a very serious one, and we all enjoyed it. So you should keep addressing our students maybe in the days to come,
Sure.
as far as Kautilya's course is concerned. And yeah, there was a good discussion also by the participants, and I thank all the participants for their active involvement and making this grand success. With these few remarks, over to Basavaraj. Basavaraj?
Yeah, thank you, Madam.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now it is the. Hello, thank you, Madam. Thank you for your remarks. Now I request Dr. Riaz to give officially your thanks.
Thank you, sir. Good
Dr.
afternoon,
Riaz?
all. Yes, sir. Sir, am I audible, sir? Hello, sir.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Good afternoon, all.
Yeah, audible.
This
Please
is
go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Riaz
Yeah.
Malik. Okay, sir. This is Riaz Malik. It's my immense pleasure to present the vote of thanks to all the distinguished guests and participants of this valuable workshop organized by Department of Economic Studies and Planning, Central University of Karnataka. At the outset, first I would like to present my thanks to the keynote speaker, Professor Manohar Rao from the School of Economics, University of Hyderabad, who spoke on the economics of taxations and welfare in Kautilya Arthashastra. Sir, your lecture was so much valuable and it added a lot of knowledge to our new knowledge about the economics and about labor economics and welfare economics. Thank you so much, sir. I extend my warm thanks to the convener and head of the Department of Economics, Professor Pushpa Savdati. Thank you so much, ma'am, for organizing and giving such a big platform for all the participants to join. I thank to the organizing secretary, Dr. S. Lingamurthy, sir, for inviting all of us to join this valuable workshop and get the knowledge from very important lectures and speakers. I extend my thanks to moderator, Dr. Basaraj, sir, for moderating this session. With this, I extend my thanks to all the participants from our department and our faculty of our department and the participants from other departments and the participants from all other universities who have joined this workshop, valuable workshop. Thank you all. Thanks for giving me this chance to speak. Thank you all.
Thank you, Riaz. One information for all the participants, please session second starts at 3 p.m. So please join before the 3 p.m. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Amanda.
Just one word before I go. I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share some of my ideas with you. I'll be too glad to associate with you in future also in your endeavors, forthcoming endeavors. And I'll consider that's my privilege. And I wish you all the best and success in your uh, forward progress in the current Kautilyan Arthashastra. And as I said in the beginning, please work hard and try to set up a specialized center, because I think, as you said correctly, there's one of the kind, in Indian universities, I never heard that where Kautilya Arthashastra is a compulsory course in economics. So maybe it demands a lot more work and a lot more effort from all of you, the researchers, as well as. So I wish you all the best and hope to join Professor Balakrishna's lecture at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.
So
Thank you,
thank you very
sir.
much, sir, for a very innovative idea. Murthy, we will float a proposal to UGC for a Center of Excellence in Chanakya Arthashastra.
Yes.
We will do it, sir.
Yeah. Certainly. I wish you all the best. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Indeed, it is our pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, sir.
I request all the participants to join at 2:30 p.m. So that if any technical problem is there, we can resolve a little early. I hope morning we have some technical errors, so we can resolve a little early if we have any kind of problem. With this, I thank everybody and I look forward for second session at 3 p.m. Better to join at 2:30 p.m. Thank you.
Audio account.